You're probably wondering why I once again put 1 in parentheses. Well, dear viewer, let me explain. Nobody won the Korean War because the fighting simply ended, so no side officially gained victory or defeat. Technically, the Korean War is still happening, it's just the longest ceasefire in human history. So when I say what if North Korea won the Korean War, I don't mean they lost the war, since there were no official victors. I just mean if they completely conquered the South and unified Korea under their regime. We all know about North Korea, or of North Korea. Nobody truly knows that much about the North since it's basically an isolated fortress, a country famous for its war rhetoric, fantastic hairstyles, and blind threats to use nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, its sister nation South Korea is a leading economic power and ally to the West. But what if the North was able to conquer the South? Say in this alternate scenario, the North wins the Korean War and Korea becomes fully communist. How would this scenario play out? Well, here's one theory. The Southern armies are unable to stop the North, and so they are wiped out completely. North Korea takes Seoul and solidifies its influence across all of Korea. For this scenario, even though it is completely unlikely, we'll say that the American government simply didn't care about Korea enough to involve itself with full-scale military intervention. With this, there is no longer a split Korea, but a single communist Korean state, with Kim Il-sung as the leader. This nation begins to get more funding from communist China and the USSR, supplying the DPRK with more weapons, supplies, and tools to cement their dominance in the South. For this scenario, the Americans in the West have deep concern over the loss of the South, but not so much as to retaliate with full-scale military action. They begin to fund anti-communist rebels and movements in the South. The West does not recognize the legitimacy of the North's claims over the South and would go through all efforts to isolate the nation. Europe and the US would sanction and go through any attempt to destroy the North's economy. However, the USSR and China are able to keep Korea propped up and supply it for its rebuilding. The South takes years to settle into North Korea's beliefs. While still a dictatorship, the country would probably be not as radical and crazy as they are today, since in our timeline much of their rhetoric is directly from the existence of a split Korea. The image of Kim Il-sung would be taught to young Koreans in the North and South. This image is reinforced with purges of political opponents following the Southern invasion. China would dominate over communist Korea. China and Korea would be competitors to American ally Japan. Tensions would be high in the Sea of Japan. In this scenario, the Korean War would simply have been a northern invasion of the South and crackdown of southern insurgents. Because of this, the Americans focus their attention more on Japan and use it to counter communist China and Korea. Because this non-military intervention did not work for the US, American foreign policy becomes much more direct when dealing with new communist forces in other parts of the world, such as Vietnam. The decision to not use military force in Korea would be seen as a failure for Truman, and he would be forever known as the president who lost Korea. Here are 3 possible outcomes for the communist nation. First is they remain a cult-worshipping isolationist dictatorship as the North is today. This is unlikely as their isolationism is directly the result of a split Korea and the potential for a new conflict. The second outcome is they could eventually modernize and become less oppressive. Perhaps for the Korean regime to stay alive, they would shift towards a capitalist society to quell the people's anger of the government, much like China did after Tiananmen Square. Third is if these new policies do not work to lessen the people's anger. Perhaps the Korean people would revolt and a new government would take its place. This is very speculative though, but there could always be a chance. How do you think Korea would be if the North had won the Korean War? Like us on Facebook, subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.